Bien, bonjour pour cet après-midi. Donc, on va quitter la biologie pour rester maintenant dans l'informatique. Et j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter Alberto Sangiovanni-Vincentelli, qui est un des grands personnages de l'informatique, qui est professeur, qui a bilocalisé. Il est professeur à Berkeley d'une part, et d'autre part, il dirige le GIE Parades à Rome. Parades, ça veut dire Project of Advanced Research on Architecture and Designs of Electronic Systems, et qui s'occupe de systèmes embarqués principalement. Et donc, il fait partie du groupe de Berkeley qui a véritablement été fondateur des circuits électroniques modernes et des logiciels embarqués modernes, et qui a eu un nombre d'élèves absolument considérable. Et Alberto a cofondé les deux des trois grandes sociétés de CAO électronique, qui sont Cadence le numéro 1 et Synopsys le numéro 2. Et il a eu un nombre considérable d'élèves. Il a eu le ACM Kaufman Award, qui est la plus grande distinction dans le domaine dans le monde. Et il est fellow de l'I3E, qui est la société savante dans le monde. Et il appartient à la National Academy of Engineering aux USA. Et voilà, et il va donc nous parler du web des objets. Alberto.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to apologize for speaking in English. I know that that may be a barrier, but I will try to speak with Italian accent, so you may be able to understand it better. So first of all, I would like to point out what we believe to be the future of, I would say, engineering, but maybe at large even of science. And we believe that the future is a crossroad of three main topics. One is the biology and biological sciences, and it's very good that Gérard has organized today the first part about biology and the interaction with computer science. In fact, the second mainstay of the future we believe, is being in informatics, so computer science and information technology. And the third one is about nanotechnology, so the technology that builds new electronic systems based on tiny structures. So think about, we heard about the neurons as being 1/1000th of 1 millimeter, but now we are talking about 1,000 of a millimeter. So you imagine that in one neuron, we are going to place 1,000 transistors. So there are imaginable things that you are going to be able to create. So it is about the interaction of these three fields that is going to be the future, which points to a very important topic, that the future of science and engineering in general is about interdisciplinarity. And we saw already this morning how much interaction there is between informatics and biology, but I would like to stress and reiterate that that is the most important thing that we should do, both in science and education, is about interdisciplinary education. Now, it's interesting to notice that in the past few years, I've seen in Europe a tendency to become more specialized. That was what was in the United States a few years ago, but now in the United States, we are moving all the way around, and we are going towards interdisciplinary study. So we are always out of phase somehow. So when Europe is focused on a vertical kind of point of view, United States is about interdisciplinary, and then we have the opposite swing. But I happen to believe that interdisciplinarity is always very good. So now, in terms of what I want to present and to give an emphasis on what I believe should be done in research, I'm going to use one of the greatest scientists of the century, Pasteur, right? And this is the famous Pasteur triangle. So there are 4 dimensions to this quadrant, and one is about with quest for fundamental understanding, that is in general what is a connotation of science, and the other one is consideration of use, how useful it is at what we do. And if we look, for example, like pure basic research like Niels Bohr, is about the quest for fundamental understanding. It's not much consideration of use. On the other side, we have the quest for fundamental understanding nil, but a lot of consideration of use. And you look at Edison as being an epitome of that work. But Pasteur was what I believe is the most interesting quadrant, that is what we call use-inspired basic research. So it's about understanding the fundamental of things, but also thinking about its practical use, if you like, and that's what engineering should be all about. So I'm an engineer, so I'm very much interested in doing and fostering research in use-inspired basic research. And I will try to give you a glimpse about that. Now, I also would like to use some of my classical background, as everybody in Italy at my age, the good people were doing classical education in their high school and then scientific education in engineering as their university career. And I would like to use the model of Giambattista Vico, who was a philosophy of history person. And Giambattista Vico thought that the human endeavors always go through cycle. So you start with the age of gods, where everything is about, senses, so not much reason in it. And then you go for the second phase, which is the ages of heroes, where imagination reign. And then the last cycle is the age of the man, where reason takes over. Now, the point is, in his view, is that the foundational part is where imagination lies, is where you invent the great new things. And then the age of man is about when you try to solidify what you have created. And so ideally, an ideal society would be always about imagination. But then after you think long and hard about solidifying things, and you have to go back to the origin, and then you start the cycle again. Now, what I believe in information technology, we have seen these cycles already. And one of my points is to say that today, about this Internet of the Things, or the physical web, we're about the age of imaginations, where we are creating new paradigms that then will be needed to be solidified. So I would like to also start my presentation with a quote from Carli Fiorina, where he points out exactly this point, that in information technology we're at a point where innovation is the key currency, is where you're really going to make your sign is about imagination and invention, and about creating some long-standing value for human society. So now, in my title, I said embedded everywhere. That is the title also of the report of the National Research Council, which is a union of the National Academy of Science and National Academy of Engineering. And we reported way back in 2001 that actually we believe that this new Internet of the Things has a potential of dwarfing the Internet. So we're about an epochal change in the way in which information technology is being considered. So the outline of my talk is about the future of communication system. Will everything be connected? And that is one of the basic paradigms of the web, is the interconnectivity of various devices. And I will also look at the emergence of societal information systems. So information systems that touch every aspect of human society. Then, as Gérard pointed out, my life has always been about design. And so what does it mean to design things? And what is the science of design, if you like? So I would like to look at what is the implication on design of this new generation of devices and interconnects. And then I would like to look at three applications, what I call the intelligent tires, and which is a typical example of how technology can impact everyday life object, a tire, right? And you think about a tire as a high-tech, I don't think so, right? But it is. And we'll see what we are trying to do in that domain. And then we'll look at the future about sustainable health and energy-efficient buildings. And then last but not least, we'll talk about how you put together a way of designing this object that is that should be more closer to science than seat-of-the-pants engineering. So now, the first thing that we would like to point out is that there is a trend about the proliferation of devices. So if you look at this thing, it is forecast that 7 trillion wireless devices serving 7 billion people in 2017, which means that you're going to have 1,000 devices per person. Okay? So imagine 1,000 objects that are going to have electronic capabilities for every single person in the world, right? We already carry a lot of things, right? Like a cell phone is a typical case, the laptop and so on. But you have seen nothing. There's much more to come. And so how come 1,000 devices per person? Let's look at the evolution of the computing elements versus the years that we have been living in. And so if you look at way back, we are talking about mainframe computers, and there was one computer for 1,000 people or more, right? 1 million people. And then if you look at the evolution, is that we are going to go towards more and more devices for a single person, and the price going down dramatically. Now, the kind of devices that we can do today are smaller than a 1 cent coin. And this object is as powerful as a mainframe of many, many years ago, actually more powerful than that. And so that has an impact which is incredible. So what is the emerging IT scene that we see? So there is going to be an architecture of the future information technology infrastructure that is going to be built upon a centralized, very powerful computing engines that are going to be localized. Think today about the servers farm that you see, for example, Google has humongous sites full of computers. Now, you know where these computers reside? Very close to where electrical energy is produced, because otherwise they will take the power network down. 7% of the entire energy consumption in the United States is about the energy that goes into the server farms of Google and so on. So imagine about that. When we are in the internet, we fire up a Google search. Think about what that means in terms of energy and computing power. Then we have a second layer, which we call the mobile access. And the mobile access are things that are related to wireless interconnection to this computing infrastructure. So these cell phones, laptop, and so on. Here, I noticed that there are a few wireless networks, so you can connect to the web sitting here in this room. And as well as your cell phones can be connected to the rest of the world. But most importantly, there is another outer layer, which is what we call the sensory swarm. And so it's like the peripherals of our body. This morning we heard about the brain and the biological systems, but think about this new world of the information technology as being like a human body. So there is going to be a lot of peripherals that are going to be our senses. There are going to be eyes, ears, touch, even noses around, right? And that's what will be the major change in the future. And these devices are going to be thousands. And that's where you are going to see the renaissance, if you like, of information technology at large, this sensory swarm. But the sensory swarm could not be put at any use unless you had the mobile access and the computing infrastructure. So it's really a system view of the world, if you like. So let's look at the technology gradient about computation. So you have two major drivers. The inner core is driven by Moore's law that says that every so many years you are going to double your computing capacity. And right now it's been going on forever. You know, people say we are going to be at the end of it, but we have not seen it yet. And then the peripheral is actually what is called driven by Moore, then Moore, and beyond Moore, meaning that there is more computing capabilities that are going to be inserted in these devices that Moore can predict. And the reason being is that these sensory devices are working on different principles. And so we have heard a lot about digital computing and so on. These sensory devices are going to be based on different principles. And so many of these will be based on analog computing. And we're already seeing devices that are even micro machines. So very tiny little engines, very tiny little horrible things. And so we at Berkeley design insects, right, that are 1 micron size that can fly, right? And so that is a kind of convergence between mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and design. So if you look at communication, the inner core is mostly wired. And so you're going to have a standard optical interconnect and so on. But the peripherals is almost uniquely wireless. So the world of the future is going to be wireless. And when you think about wireless, you may think about GPS and GSM and this and that and up and down, but you have seen nothing. The kind of protocols that you will need to develop to connect the sensors that we were talking about before to the inner core is going to be very, very rich and mostly ad hoc. So what is then the societal AAT system? So it's a complex collection of sensor controllers, compute nodes, and actuators that work together to improve our daily life. Now, if you think how we are built, human beings are built, we have sensors, so we can sense the environment. We have the computing power, which sits here or distributed in our body, and we have actuators, arms, legs, and so on, that can interact with the world by changing it, right? And so the future of our system is going to be exactly the same. It's going to be a combination of these many different capabilities. So what is then the impact of this new infrastructure? So for one thing is to think about automotive and avionics safety and control. Now, we are talking about unmanned vehicles. So you are going to see cars that are driving alone, no driver. We already seen this year in the DARPA Grand Challenge a completely unmanned car living for 4 hours, totally uncontrolled, in a city street, right? With no driver, no nothing, just completely driven by machines. Now, if you look at this car, it's horrible, right? It's full of wires and sensors that are all over the place, so you never want to be in that car. But it says that it's possible to do. We are thinking about airplanes that never have any problem in the future, hopefully, and no accident. We are thinking about environmental control, energy management, and safety in your home. We are going to look at immersion-based work and play. So one example is the Wii workstation, right? It's like the game in which you can actually swing at the ball, right? And that is one example of how you're going to work with these devices. I mean, you are going to play tennis staying in your home and in your living room. Management of metropolitan traffic flows, that's one of the major issues, how you control traffic. Distributed health monitoring, we are talking about 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, in which you are under constant control. So anything that goes wrong with your system is going to be detected and communicated to the appropriate people. Power distribution with decentralized energy generation. So this, as we know, energy is probably today the most important item to worry about from economic point of view, and the cost of energy is only going to go up. So we are talking about a society that is going to use energy that is locally generated and possibly at zero cost. Right? So that is what is being enabled by this technology. So the opportunities are very large, and we are touching almost everything you can dream of. And so the point is that how do you bring this wealth to the people? I mean, how do you build this system? How do you make an economic system thrive out of these devices? And so we are going then to look at the implication on design. How are you going to design these things? So the moment for true system-level design is finally here. This morning we heard about the bottom-up design, for example, and when we were talking about the immunology and the immune system, how most of the device that we have today is built bottom-up. And so is that a good way of building device? I don't think so. I mean, most of the engineers today put together system by putting together pieces and then building something bigger out of the pieces. Now, is that the only way to do? We heard some question about top-down, bottom-up design, which one is better, and so on. But definitely the system-level design is about conceiving a system and designing optimally what the system has to do. And then we also have to rethink the meaning of scaling. Now, scaling in the past has always been about chips. How do you make chips smaller and smaller, and you put more and more devices on the chip? Now, in this domain, what we are thinking about is scaling, meaning touching the entire world and having everybody connected. So it's scaling both in the small and in the large. And you can imagine how many problems that is bringing up. So semiconductor and design automation industries are focused on component design. So we need to address the system in its entirety, as I said before. And so the key issues to look at and try to solve are the complexity and emergent behavior of network systems. Now, this is a very important topic. Now, how many of you have been through Terminal 5 at IFRO? You know, okay, so you may want to report on that experience. But you know what happened there? I mean, that terminal was supposed to be the linchpin of the British aeronautical system, and it was a total, complete disaster. You know why? Because there were a lot of side behavior that were not predicted when the system had been designed. And so that's what we call as emergent behavior. So behavior that was not seen when you put together the pieces. And side effects. So think about, you know, some of the, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie that is an old remake as I'm a Legend or something like that. It's about people designing a drug that was supposed to end cancer, and actually what created is a terrible, you know, disease that was going around. And why is that? Because the emergent behavior was not predicted, was not forecast. Power is, and latency as driving matrix. Power is indeed going to be a major issue in our design. And then last but not least, we want to have reliable systems. How do you build reliable systems? And that is not being, I mean, people have looked at it, and they have looked at methodology to be a reliable system, but the issue that we are facing in the future is that our transistors, the little things that we build our system out of, are becoming more and more unreliable. So the more you scale down this object, the less clear is what they do. So when we talk about digital systems, right, in the past, I mean, this morning we talk a lot about digital abstraction. And this is based on the switching, right? And so things going from 0 to 1. Now, in the future, the transistors are not going to switch between 0 and 1. We don't even know what they are going to do. So how do you build a reliable system out of tiny things that don't behave reliably? And so, for example, our human being is built this way. So each of our neurons are not so reliable. In fact, 50,000 of our devices die every day, and you still work and function. So the issue is that how do you solve a reliability system in similar ways as we solve it for a human living? So this is a paper that I put out in the proceedings of the IEEE in March 2007, where I try to make a kind of overall view on what is going on in system-level design and where we are at and what we need to do. But the point is that I believe that this system-level design is a novel engineering field. And why is that? Because we are trying to put together what you do at the chip level as well as the macro level. Is when you think about the big system that I was talking about. And so that requires a new way of thinking. So addressing complexity. So we talk about the incredible numbers of interconnects in our brain. We talk about the incredible number of neurons that are in our brain. We talk about the incredible length of the connection in our brain. And so the issue is that massive concurrency and heterogeneity is the key of how we make very large complex system work. And so we are trying to build this reliable system out of this messy situation. So what is needed here? So for one thing is that we need to raise the level of abstraction. And so we need to think about no more about bottom-up, but we have to think also at the top-down part of the design, if you like. But then, do I believe that top-down is the right way of going? Pure top-down? Actually, not. So I think that as any good engineering, you have to do compromises. And so I think that the best way to approach this very complex problem is to do what I call meet-in-the-middle design methodology. So you have to think about how you assemble things out of components, but with a plan. So you have to have a master plan, the top-down view, and you have to use whatever you have available, the bottom-up view. And so it's a combination of the two that gives you the power to be able to construct this Internet of Things or very large system, as we talk about. So system-level design science, if you like. Now, once we have seen what kind of implications are on design, let me give you 3 examples of the kind of things that are being done, and you are going to see very soon. So the first thing is I would like to show you is intelligent tires. This is a project that we are actually carrying out at Berkeley in collaboration with Pirelli, which is a tire company. And so we'll see how a tire can become an intelligent thing. And so the key issue is that how do you marry the very tiny electronic devices with something like a tire, and you make the life of people and car driver better. And so remember that whatever the car does on the road goes through the tire. And so a lot of the things that your car does for stability control, you know, the EPS system, ESP system that is trying to get your car to be more stable, and think about, for example, ABS, the braking system, is all predicated upon an estimation of what is going on the street. But now, if you can indeed measure what the tire is actually doing on the road, then you don't need to estimate anything. You measure it. Okay? So what we are trying to achieve is, for example, to see how much grip the tire has on the road, so that if you are taking a turn and your car starts sliding, you know before it actually slides. And you can adjust the car so that it doesn't slide. One application of this thing is actually not everyday driving, but think about Formula One cars. What is the typical control problem that they would like to solve? Is that what is the maximum torque that they can deliver to the wheels before they start spinning? Spinning wheels is bad, right? You don't get efficiency. Going below the actual maximum amount of torque, you go slower. So what you would like to go is just at the level at which you start slipping, but you don't slip. And so how do you measure that, right? It's through the tire. And so how do you then instrument a tire to be working that way? So you see this tiny object here? This is what we plug into the tire. We glue this little tiny box inside the car. And this little thing is able to tell you what the tire is doing on the road. And among other things, and we call it cyber tire, right, the intelligent tire. And that's the kind of things we can do. We can detect what kind of tire you have. We can detect if your tire is at the end of your life. If it has had an accident, for example, if you slam into the curb, you know that the tire body is compromised. Right? So you have a problem there. And so you may have a car which is not braking correctly because you hit the road. You hit the curb. So we can tell you that. We can also tell you if you are on a high spot, on a wet spot, if the pavement on which you are driving is actually has a particular granularity or it's slick. We can measure where you are going. If there is gravel, you know when you drive on gravel, they will tend to slip, right? And my worst possible hit in my youth was going in bicycle and hitting gravel and boom, going by, right? So that's not, hopefully, going to happen any longer. So let me give you an idea of what this thing is doing. So you see the little object going by, and that is the measurement that we take. And so what you see here, these two big peaks correspond to when the little dot hits the road. And so the size of that interval tells you how much of the tire is actually on the road. And that from there, you can compute how much grip the tire has on the road. Now, of course, what you need to do then is to, from this signal that you collected by that little tiny device, you need to extract the information that I just said and send it to somewhere in the car where all the computation is going to be taken and all the actuation for the car is going to be done. So this one is about safety and accuracy about the measurement of what your devices are going to do. By the same token, you could put the same device in the tire of the airplane, and you can see if you have problems on the airplane. Remember that one case of big accident by an airplane was caused by the tire being blown up. Okay. So now let's look at the other two examples of applications. One is what we call energy efficient buildings and sustainable health. So let me look at the building problem. Now we are going to do this Internet of Things for buildings. So now if I have data for United States, of course, but I assume that Europe is not going to be that different. But if you look at buildings in the United States, about 39% of total US energy is consumed in buildings. And so if we can do anything to improve the building efficiency, we are saving billions of dollars of cost. Not only, but US buildings produce 48% of carbon emission. And so we can also have a clean tech effect if we can control these buildings in a better way. So the energy intensity is actually increasing. So the amount of energy that we spend in buildings, instead of going down, is actually going up because more and more things are done in buildings. For example, in the United States, if you go in a building during the summer, you have really a very low temperature, so you have to put on jackets and the like, as well as during the winter, you have to go there in T-shirts because they heat it too much, in my opinion. So the point of controlling these kind of things is very, very important. Now, in terms of the opportunities and the way in which you have to think about the informational system in buildings goes all the way from the actual single device that you can control better, similar to what we have seen in the tires, all the way up to the control of the entire building. Now, when you think about control of the entire building, it's not only about, for example, air conditioning. So being able to control how much heat or how much cold air you put in, and how to do that in the best possible way. But when you think about buildings, you have also to think about emergency, for example. Emergency is when there is a fire, for example, and you need to have the people go out safely. Think about the 9/11 problem, right? September 11 problem, where first hit, right? We had a lot of people inside the buildings that were kept in there because people felt that they needed to make the people go out in slowly. And they ended up dying because they were not managed correctly. And so the egress problem, so how you make people go out after an emergency, a fire or an earthquake and so on, is a big problem in terms of management of the building. And so what we are trying to achieve is to build a very complex information technology system that will allow you to control, as I said before, the energy consumption, but also to control the egress of people if some major event occurs. Now, by the way, when you think about controlling the temperature in a building, you may imagine that that is a fairly simple problem. It's far from it. And one of the reasons is that the number of people present in a particular room has a lot of effects on the kind of heat and cooling that you need to do. But in addition to that, there is also the effects that our body have on airflow. You know, the best way in which you can cool things is by having laminar flows, right? But laminar flows are generated when you have slick surfaces, but we are angular, right? So when you are in a room, we actually create vortices. And vortices are creating inefficiencies in the way in which we cool and heat our buildings. So that is indeed a big issue. So when we are going to try to build these decision support-enabled buildings, well, you do robust decision-making and response to problems, as we said before, At the same time, we are also trying to improve the energy efficiency. So the issue about the building is about managing hundreds of heterogeneous sensors and thousands of agents acting in this building. And they have to dynamically monitor situations like faults, threats, and response with a lot of uncertainty because, as we know, there are lots of potential false alarms that are due to situations that were not forecast when you put the system in. So I don't know how many of you have a burglar alarm system in your home, but in my particular case, about 60% more, 80% of the alarms are due to no alarm at all, but they still go off, right? So you need to deal with all these kind of things in an intelligent way. Now, interestingly enough, it's not only about designing the buildings so that they can be efficient energetically and so on. But in buildings, one of the major problems is the fact that the devices are broken or are mounted wrong. You know, in some buildings that I've seen, there are air conditioning systems in which the input and output are reversed. And so they do actually the opposite of what they're supposed to do because the technician who has deployed your air conditioning system has deployed it wrongly. And so you have to have a very efficient detection system that is telling you, by the way, this thing has been mounted wrong. Go there and put it right, right? And so it's not only about the design, but it's about the operation of the building itself. And so that is what you see here. You can even have problems by the fact that you have a damage in the walls of your building. And think about earthquake. You know, we live in California, right? Berkeley is right on the Hayward Fault, which is one of the major faults for earthquake. You know, one of the issues is that when you have an earthquake, you have to be careful about the structural damage that your building may have sustained. And so we put these devices inside the major buildings in San Francisco to see if after the earthquake there has been structural damage. So you don't see it, but it is there. So you want to make sure of that. So in fact, in the Bay Bridge, we have placed about 1,000 of these devices every so many meters to make sure that if an earthquake comes, indeed we are sure that this thing is not going to collapse maybe a month after the earthquake. And so this is, and indeed we found that there are serious gaps in design and modeling, fault diagnosis and self-tuning, understanding and exploiting dynamic as control in complex multi-component interacting systems. Now, when you think about information technology, there are two kinds of applications, if you like. One kind of application is what is called data intensive. So all that has to do with entertainment, right? The web that you use to see movies, to hear music, and so on. But the other big application domain of information technology is about controlling things. And so the example that I gave you about the car and the buildings is more about control than about information processing. And so control is probably one of the most serious issues that have not been resolved satisfactorily up to now. So let's go into the healthcare and fitness. So we know that we can do a lot of things with electrical devices today. We have seen EEG scans with all these electrodes and wires all over the place. Electrocardiograms, you are all wired up. And you have sleep apnea, by the way, which is a very serious condition. And you have people sleeping with tons of wires going out of their body. And in sports, of course, who is a runner? I do run a lot. I have all these devices around my chest and so on and so forth. Now, wouldn't it be very nice to have just a wireless patch somewhere in your body connected wireless with everything else, and so you can monitor your health signs? And that is what we are doing. So there are lots and lots of new companies being born in the United States that are dealing with this kind of applications. So tiny patches that you put on your chest that are non-intrusive, and you can change every so many days. They are not bothering you in the least. I tried one of these. It's not an issue. And that is going to change healthcare in a significant way. And in fact, architecture of these systems, okay, is going to be like this. So you're going to have micro patches, and 20 and 30 meters are going to go to a micro base, and then this is going to connect to the rest of the world. Now, as micro base, you can use your cell phone. So your cell phone can be connecting all the data of your body and then sending it through the standard cellular network to the hospitals. And again, this is actually being deployed. Now, what is the basic promise of all this system? I mean, there is economic incentive to build this system, but the cost of deploying and designing this system is still too high. That's the reason why you cannot buy in your pharmacy some of this stuff, because it takes too much to design and to deploy. So how are we going to solve this problem? Guess what? It is trying to build up a design methodology for this societally information system. And this is the last part of my talk, and is aiming about building a science to solve this set of problems. So what are the main design challenges? So one, and possibly foremost, is power and energy. So assume that you have these tiny patches on your body, right? Who is going to give power to it? You know, so suppose that you have that device that I put in the tire. Now, notice that the device goes inside the tire. So can you change batteries? You know how long a tire lasts? It's about 5 years in general. A car lasts about 10 years. And you have to think about 5 years lifetime for a tire, even though in principle after 1 year you should change it. But it's 5 years. So are you going to have a battery that lasts 5 years? No chance, right? And how about things that are attached to your body? How much space do you have to put the battery? Batteries, there are very thin batteries and non-intrusive and all of that, but they last not long. How long does your cell phone battery last? It's about 3 days at best, right? And so that is a big issue. So it's the energy, how you get the energy. So you know how we solve the problem of the energy in the tire? It's energy scavenging. So you get energy from the environment. And so how do you get the energy from the environment? Looks easy, right? Not so at all. You know how much the acceleration inside the tire is? It's about 3,000 G. 3,000 G. If you go 180 kilometers per hour on the periphery of the tire, it's 3,000 G. So it's immense amount of energy. But what is the problem? The problem is extracting it, right? So what kind of principle can you use? Well, use a bar, right? A piezoelectric device that is going to bend, right? And this will create electrical energy out of it. Now, the point is that at 3,000 G, this bar is very likely to break, you know. So you may have the energy, but you may not have a 5-year lifetime. So that's to be excluded. And so we ended up by building up a tiny electrical generator that has a mass, a body, that has a magnetic feature, and so it goes up and down. You know, when the tire turns, this thing hits the end of a run, and then it hits the other run, and tack, 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 tack. That is exactly the same as a electrical engine, where you have a magnetic body going in an electric field, so it generates energy. That's the way we do it. But you know how much energy, maximum, we can create out of these devices? 1 milliwatt out of 3,000 G. Right? You know how much energy there is, for example, power you get when you brake a car which has about 200 kilometers per hour, so I know this result for Formula One, is 1 megawatt. You know? And so out of 1 megawatt, you get 1 milliwatt of usable power. Now, the next thing is RF transmission. Now, you have these devices that are on your body, inside the car, and so on. So how do you transmit the information? We say wirelessly, right? Fine. And so do you think that we are using, for example, GSM to communicate between the tire and the car, the information about the slip and the grip of the tire in the car? No way. Why? Because it consumes too much energy, one. And second, you know that the body of the tire is full of steel, right? It is a cage around it, so the signal doesn't go out very easily. So how do you make it go out? And so you use what is called ultra-wideband communication, so very, 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 very high-frequency communication signal that can go through that. So power consumption and reliability is an issue. And the other thing is design of antennas. The antennas that are going to send out the information are very difficult to design because they have to be very tiny and very resistant. Now, compute power, as we said before, reasonable computation takes about 500 microwatt at least, or 1 milliwatt in most cases of interest. And then last but not least is where design comes in, is program the application. So you have to put in the software. You have to put in the intelligence into these devices to make them do what you want it to do. And so that's the issue of scalability, portability, and configurability. The point is that if you, for every single application and for every single domain, you have to redesign your system, and you have to think about, for every single tiny piece of information, a different protocol, a different way of architecting your device, then you are out of luck. And so the point is that there is very little reflection on how this translates into application. And what we need to solve is how to build an infrastructure, a design infrastructure that is going to carry across different domains. And so let's look then at the issue of compositionality. So how we are going to put these things in such a way that we can do it once and then use it 2 million times, right? To reuse it all the time. And we are talking about then compositionality in embedded system. Now, if you look at what, for example, Microsoft leaves us to believe is that, well, gee, you have a new device, you plug it into your laptop, and boom, it works. Is what is called plug and play, right? Most of it is plug and play. So I don't know how many of you had blue screen. I keep on having it. Even this morning before I kind of came in with my laptop, I had a blue screen right there. And the reason is because I connected this thing, right, the projector, and it gave me blue screen, plug and play, right? So that's not exactly science. And then there is also the issues about from specification to implementation. So Picasso is one of my favorite painters, so I'll use this example to give you. So you give a specification like this, and then when you go and implement it, it comes out like this. You know, that's not exactly similar to what you started. And this is exactly what happens, is that from the specification, what your system you want to do, you plug in various components, and lo and behold, what comes out is a little monster that has very little resemblance to what you want it to do. And this is essentially due to the design practice, and in general, the way in which people put together these systems is very haphazard. It's like, you know, these palafittes, you know, these homes built out of very thin sticks. Now, what we want to build is design science, which means something that lasts for 2,000 years. This one is the Sugesta temples, and lo and behold, it's not being restored. It's the way, this is the way it is, and it's always been this way. Okay, so if we look at the architecture of embedded system today, of this system that are everywhere, it looks like this. So it's kind of a shanty town. The reason being is that the applications are built by successive increasing of what you had already. And nobody wants to touch what you had, because it's so difficult to verify that these things work correctly that you don't want to touch it. And so you keep on increasing the boundary of what you have done before. And so what you come up is a very fragile infrastructure. And so what you would like to do then is to build something, again, more solid and to have something like this. So embed the software architecture of tomorrow may be like this. Okay, I'm Italian. Guess what it is. Okay, so what is then the design science dilemma? So on one side, what you want to be is like Plato. So you want to be abstract, and you want to think about the solid foundation about what you do. But on the other side, as Aristotle says, is that you have to be able to do things. And so the problem about design is that you want to make it a science, but you want to be usable. And so how do you strike that balance between the two? So for example, we have seen many different approaches in theoretical computer science that never been seen the light in actual application because they were too complicated or too complex to be deployed. On the other hand, you don't want to go into the point of having practice that is not based on theory because otherwise you don't know what you get. And so today we are pretty much in this dichotomy situation in which people do things without solid foundation and people build solid foundation, but then they don't build buildings, right? They just build the foundation. So what I believe is that we need to build a modern computational system science and system design practice with all these things taken into consideration. So concurrency is parallelism, right? We talked about this morning about our brain is a highly parallel system, and our computer is essentially as a sequential system, right? That does things one after the other. Composability, how you put together things so that they continue to work after you compose them. Hierarchy, how you build a different layer of abstraction. Heterogeneity, I believe that most of the system of this kind of complexity have to be built out of pieces that are specialized for their function. They are not the same kind of system. So you're trying to put together, a peg, a round peg, and a square hole, right? And so there are things that are not of the same nature, right? So I believe, for example, that the best way in which you can design a system is to combine different domains, right? So I believe that for our brain, for example, works out of analog and digital computing. But I don't want to build a human brain, by doing this system, but I want to see what it is the most efficient way in which I can build this system by exploiting the characteristic of the application. Resource constraints. The other thing is that we don't have infinite computing, nor we have infinite energy, nor we have infinite communication bandwidth. So design, when you design this kind of system, is not designing in the abstract. So Turing machine, no good. Turing machine, why no good? Because Turing machine abstract away, for example, time and power. Now, timing and power are the essential things for this domain. We need to compute within hard time limit. The point is that when you break your car, you don't want to say that eventually the task is going to terminate, right? You want to be done as fast as possible and within 1 millisecond. If it is longer, you die, right? That's not good, right? So the timing has to be in there. And power, again, you don't want your cell phone to last 1 minute, right? You want to last it potentially at least a week, right? And so the fact that computing takes time, computing takes energy, has to be considered. And so the abstraction that we have used for many years are not the right abstraction for this kind of application. Okay, so communication and composition. So we said before that when you compose things, it's all a matter of making them talk to each other. So how they communicate. So we saw how the brain works with axon and dendrites. So similar things happens when you put together a different part of your system. You want them to do something together. You have to make them communicate. So let me look at a slightly abstract way about communication. So you have two processes. Each one is considered as a set of input and outputs. And this process is, given a set of input, is computing a set of outputs. Now, what does it mean to make these two processes communicate? Now, our immediate view is to connect the output of the first process to the input of the second process, right? As simple as that. Now, what happens if, so your communication is like this. Connection C enables the interaction between the behavior of S and R. But assume that the process R is not defined for some or all outputs of S. So you have a mismatch. So assume that I start talking in Italian. Right now I'm speaking in English. I assume that 90% of you understand what I'm saying. Suppose that I start speaking in Italian. So I assume that 10% of you may understand what I'm saying, and the rest 90% are cut off. Why? Because your input is different than my output, and so you're stuck, right? And so that's what is called behaviors mismatch. And so if I put two things that speak a different language, it doesn't make sense to connect them together. And that is the problem of heterogeneous system composition, is when you put two things that speak a different language together, you don't know what you get. And very often you get very funny behaviors. So now, how would you solve a problem like this, like we do, right? My native language is Italian, your native language is French, and we resort to English, right? As a common semantic that we can understand, right? How can we do that? How can I speak in English if my native language is Italian? Because I learn English, fine. But how come that I can speak in English and you can understand English and all that? Because there must be another level above it where we define human language, right? And so that is what allows us to map what we know when we were born into something else that we can communicate with. And so what we have to find is a common semantic domain where things can be connected together. And that is the theory that I'm talking about. So a heterogeneous system, when you connect two things together like that, the problem is that the communication is not well defined because you're trying to put together things that don't match. And so in order to make them match, you have to abstract the problem someplace, tell what you mean here, and then project back. It's what we do right now in this talk. And the same thing in science. We have to do the same in engineering when we design this object. And that's something that I've been doing for the past year. So it's what we call behavior adapters that encapsulate the behavior of process S and process R so that they can talk to each other. So the question is that how do we build these things? And this is not trivial mathematics, so we have to take this communication problem, map it into a common domain where things are understood, and then define what we mean by having them interchange information, and then project back where we started from so that we can capture the properties of this interconnection. Okay, so this is Bill Gates again. So I'm pushing next slide, and next slide doesn't come up. So let me say what the next thing is going to be after this slide. Hopefully it's going to come up. But once you solve this problem of saying, okay, we are going to connect these two things together, the issue is about what I said before, is to combine top-down design process and bottom-up design process. Now, let's think about what we have seen here about the communication. It's about behaviors. So what this object is supposed to do, what language it talks about, and what this object language is. Now, when we want to implement, what do we want to do? We want to map this behavior onto components that we have available. So, for example, when you design circuits, and I don't know how many of you are electrical engineer, but if you look at any design problem, you have transistors, you have resistors, you have capacitors. What are these? They are basic building blocks. And these basic building blocks connected together form what you want to do. So you have to have a basis where you describe and you map what you want to do onto the objects that you have available. Now, if you think about anything that has been done in electrical engineering and potentially in computer science, it's about this. It's about having something you want to do, and you have a bunch of objects that you have available, and how you combine the available objects to realize what you want to do. And so this thing is a bottom-up part, is what you have available, and what you want to do is a top-down part. And the matching of the two is what matters. And so, for example, Gérard was telling about the foundation of companies, right? So I was lucky enough to found a few companies in the past. And now that I'm rather older than when I founded this company, I think back what we did is exactly this. You know, this principle of saying, I have what I want to do, and I have a bunch of objects that I need to use to build what I want to do, and how to do that optimally, how to choose this object in such a way that I do what I want to do in the most efficient way is what we sell, right? It's exactly this. Now, this was for circuits, was for designing integrated circuits, for designing chips. And what we are doing today is to use exactly the same principle to design buildings, like the interconnect and the that I was talking about before, and the kind of things that you want to put together in the building to solve the energy problem and to solve the information technology problem. It's exactly the same thing. And how about the tiny device that you put in the in the tire? Exactly the same thing. It's about putting together a communication subsystem, putting together the energy scavenging system, putting together the algorithm that is supposed to extract the data and putting it together. That's exactly the same thing. So there must be a principle behind it, and that's what we call platform-based design. And actually, there is a way of formalizing all these simple things that I told you that makes this process generalizable so that you can build tools that are usable across the universe of engineering problems. And so we hopefully are going to enable a new generation of design tools that hopefully are going to create new companies potentially and new wealth. Now, said all of this, there is the last message that I want to do. So you see this thing didn't unfreeze, so I just keep on going as if we had slide. The last thing I wanted to do is that I wanted to stress how important it is education. Now, if you believe what I just said, the fact that, for example, to design this Internet of Things, you need to understand the very tiny things, right? The objects, the sensors, right? The nanostructures. But you need also to understand how you connect them together. You also need to understand what kind of algorithms you can implement. And you need to understand how you can compose the objects to build this algorithm. And you want to be able to prove that the algorithm you have, when you implement them on the objects that you have available to you, is actually doing what you wanted to do and no other things, no emergent behaviors, right? No side effects. Then you need to train people to understand all these concepts, right? And so you need people that are versed in mathematics, versed in computer science, versed in basic physics, versed in nanotechnology, as well as biology, for example. Because, by the way, this principle I talked to you about, we are trying to use to do synthetic biology. Is what some people this morning were talking about. The first talk was talking about synthetic biology. What is synthetic biology? It's a capability of designing organisms that have been built out of components. So we can engineer bacteria out of components. It's the same problem, as I told you before. It's the same problem as building a chip. It's the same problem as building an information system for a building. It's the same problem. And so we're actually building up an infrastructure to design synthetic bacteria based exactly on the same thing. And so my recommendation to any kind of scientific group is always think in terms of interdisciplinarity and try to abstract as much as possible out of it. And more than anything, please be careful about education, how we educate people. Don't put people in stovepipes. Don't put people in theoretical computer science without having them understand a bit about biology or about nanotechnology. Don't put people that know only physics. Put them in such a way that they can interact and discuss with guys that are in biology. And that is, in my opinion, the most important thing that for educators and scientists we need to do. Think about interdisciplinary education. And we have to go back to our roots. I mean, as I said, I'm Italian, so, well, if you think way back, like in the 1400s and 1300s, the Renaissance men were supposed to know a little bit of everything, right? Leon Battista Alberti and Michelangelo, whatever, right? They knew how to do many different things. And that is the greatness of the future. It's about our greatness in the past. And so we as Europeans probably have much more leverage than other countries. And so we should not lose that leg up that we said before. Thank you very much.